Let's talk conspiracy theory, culture, and the human soul right now on Gen X News. Well, everybody, welcome to the show. We are streaming live right now, of course, to X, Rumble, and YouTube. And be sure to subscribe on those platforms. Now, we're getting severe thunderstorm warnings here. And it's windy. So if we go, if everything disappears, you know why. I'm getting, literally, I have the Ring, the Ring camera, and you get this app, and you get all the people. They can message and they can tell you, hey, I have a dog. Is your dog missing? And the community things. And someone's just messaging, asking if anyone lost a trampoline because one just landed in their yard. So that's how windy it is. Trampolines are flying. They're landing in people's yards. Someone was asking about a tornado. I don't think there's a tornado on the way. Maybe just some thunder and lightning. So hopefully we'll hold tight for this show. Remember, the website is at genxonx.com. That's GENXONX.com. All the links are there. You can donate. You can become a subscriber on X. Everything's pretty self-explanatory right there, so you can go to that website. Now, today's show, of course, is kind of biblical. We're calling it the Blood Drinkers. I'm going to let Walter Bosley, our guest, explain a lot of that because I'm not really a theologian. I don't know a lot. I know the Book of Enoch is not in the Bible. It was discluded. So we'll get into all of that and why and what these blood drinkers are and how they're related to fallen angels and other religions and stuff like that. So I'm going to be quiet and I'm going to bring Walter in because he's going to tell us all about it. Welcome to the show, Walter.
Hey, Melissa, it's good to be here again.
Yeah, it's great. You got the film noir feel going on.
Yeah, I tried.
Muted color, I love it. It's great.
This shirt, because as I was telling you earlier, we're having a little bit of a heat wave this weekend, an odd little weekend-only heat wave.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so hot, our air conditioning doesn't work. This shirt is one of my, I think it's an Under Armour or whatever. This was an issued shirt that I would wear under my bulletproof vest. Because it gets really hot.
Oh.
Yeah, and it's like the coolest shirt I have to wear in this heat because it's really lightweight. That's how hot it is here, and that's what it's like without the AC. So the reason I mention it is it's actually a blue color, but it looks almost like this shimmery black with this.
It does. It does. Before we get into it, I just want to say to everybody out there, Happy Mother's Day. It's Mother's Day. My son's in Canada. He's working, but he managed to text me, which is amazing because my son is horrible at calling. He doesn't like to talk on the phone. He doesn't like to express any emotions now that he's an adult. I'm like, I miss my boy. He was little and he was all about mom. Now it's like, if I get a text, it says, Happy Mother's Day, bye. That's like love. So I got that. So that's good. So happy Mother's Day, everybody. Now, I don't know. Do we get started? For those who don't know who Walter is, what's your background and how did you get into your channel and talking about things like blood drinkers? Like, that's a little bit separated from your original career.
Yes. Well, from the time I was a kid, my first favorite genre of film was horror. So I grew up on horror films and reading spooky novels and literature, and that kind of went parallel with interests in the paranormal and occultic type things. And it was those kind of things that my mentor, who got me into my career, and I first really, connected on. And he actually said, among a couple other things, he goes, if you want to learn more about that stuff, you ought to think about, going to work for Uncle Sam. And I said, really? And he said, yeah. And so that's how I ended up going 20 years in the U.S. national security community between multiple agencies, including the military and the FBI and such, and spent when you add the last year and a half that I was under a federal contract as a background investigator for, like, doing stuff for people that need security clearances, a full 20 years, rounded that out. But I was always interested in this stuff, and I was always having strange, personal, weird experiences. So, when I finished that career, I had started a small press publishing company, primarily focused on adventure fiction, like pulp type stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was, along the way, I wrote my first nonfiction book, Latitude 33, about the weird arcane engineering of Disneyland. And oh boy,
Oh, yes.
that
Yes.
opened up the floodgates, and I started pulling threads. And that was followed by 3 books that really led to a path of Hecate, the goddess of the Triple Crossroad and the underworld. She stands at the gate of the underworld. When you die, some people, I guess, go see St. Peter, but everybody passes through Hecate's gate. And so,
Right.
these things always interested me. And hand in hand with that comes an interest in ancient history, right? Because when you study ancient history, that's where you really learn more about these things. And
Right. And you learn more and realize that the official narrative isn't really everything. Or
right,
the
yeah,
truth isn't the truth. You also,
exactly.
okay, is it true that you're a Dark Shadows fan? Speaking of
Oh,
blood
big
drinking
time.
vampires?
Yeah,
Yeah, I thought so. I loved Dark. I didn't know it until I was older because I was born in 77 and then
yeah,
we never had TV because we were ghetto poor when I was little. So when I saw it, I was like, oh wow, that's where the first sort of romantic vampire kind of guy
exactly.
came from.
Barnabas predates them all. Barnabas predates, the any of the sympathetic vampires you can name, in stuff. And I was in that. I was very young, but I was one of the original, audience members for Dark Shadows. Our babysitters, my sisters and I, when we were little kids, our babysitters would watch it, right? And I remember I was 4 years old when I started watching Dark Shadows, and yeah, it used to spook the hell out of me, but I loved it. And
Some of the narratives are really weird. I think I
mhm.
like the narrative where he first went back in time.
Oh, that was, yeah,
That
that
was
was
the
a
best
classic
one.
one. Generally, the best episodes tend to be the ones where we're introduced to Quentin, and he goes back to the
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
1890s. That was the
Yeah.
second time I think he went back in
Yeah.
time. But the first time and that second time, those classic episodes, he uses the I Ching to do time travel, and it's
Yeah, and there was some
informative.
funny things. Okay, I remember there was this scene where they come back and the lady's dead, but it's like this fake Halloween skeleton. And when I
Mhm.
first saw it, I started laughing so hard. I'm like, the actual ability for those actors to pretend that this was real is
Yeah,
phenomenal because I started laughing as soon as I saw that. I couldn't help it. Oh, I
yeah,
just
it
love the
is.
pros.
There was some cheese.
Oh, Walter, you're gonna have to come back. You kind of disconnected. Maybe the storm's in Walter's end. It was Dark Shadows, guys, for people who are watching. We'll see if Walter comes back. You just check it out. It's on Tubi for sure for free. And I believe you can get it other places, but definitely you can get it on Tubi because that's where I watch it. Let me just say, I'll just send him a message. Fell out. Boom. There we go. So yeah, I had some clips, but I won't be able to bring them up because I was originally going to have a show on Dark Shadows. Walter's back. I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened. It just
I
you
was,
froze.
well,
You
there
froze and cut out.
I froze, and there was something else I was using earlier that was open. So I went to close that, and it closed everything. Sorry about that.
It's okay. It's okay. It's all good. So yeah, the Dark Shadows was it's interesting. So it's kind of is there any connection between that kind of real vampire and then this kind of topic
Um,
for you, like for
I think
interest?
going back, certainly, um, it led to the dramatization of such things, which led to, I think the first vampire story as such in literature is Varney the Vampire, and then there was something else before Bram Stoker's Dracula, of course. And but yeah, this is an idea that goes back to the Nephilim. You remember the
Right?
giants, um, the giants that roamed the earth, of course, mentioned in biblical times, and they started eating us. They would, and they would drink our blood. It literally talks about them drinking our blood, and
And
you
they
also.
come from fallen angels
Well,
or
yeah,
something?
the story is in the Bible that that the fallen angels uh, bred with earth women, and they gave birth to the Nephilim, the giants, the men of renown is also how it was put,
Hmm.
and yeah, they had no boundaries, right? Nothing to check themselves, and they would do all manner of horrid things, and one of them was to eat us, to eat our flesh and to drink our blood. But you also have the other traditions, in Hinduism, of course, you have Kali. Now, the shallow understanding of Kali, of course, is the horrific. We see the image of her with the teeth, the fangs, and the.
She's like some kind of devouring goddess that's
Yeah,
cursed.
exactly. And there have been Kali cults, probably most famously historically, the Thuggees. And, they would do human sacrifices to Kali. I just finished reading for the second time a wonderful novel by Dan Simmons titled Song of Kali, in which a guy, this takes place in 1980 something, early 80s, and he and his wife, he's a literary expert, and he and his wife and their little infant child go to Calcutta because he's supposed to receive a manuscript from a poet who supposedly died years before but might still be alive. And it's a very moody type thing. It was Dan Simmons' first novel. And in that novel, it depicts a modern Kali cult that does horrific things and resurrects the dead. It's very much, and I'm sure Simmons was inspired by the story The Horror at Red Hook by H.P. Lovecraft. So if you're familiar with Lovecraft and you're familiar with the Red Hook story, you'll really like Song of Kali because there's things clearly right out of that story. But blood drinking also is found in European lore. You know the little
Hmm.
garden gnomes with the red pointy hats?
Yeah, are they blood
Okay.
drinkers?
Well, that's how the hats turn red. Those hats start out white,
They
and
store blood?
they drink the menstrual blood of virgins
God, their
out of those
hats are
hats for the spiritual and
okay. Their
arcane.
hats are like tampons.
Yeah,
That's
they
so
start out
weird.
white and they are turned red with blood. So next time you see the travel gnome on the TV commercial, or you're driving by someone's house and you see the little gnomes with the red cone hats, think about that. And what's his name? DeVere is his last name. Um,
I've never had a garden gnome in my garden, and now I know why. It was instinctual.
yeah, but yeah, this is written about. This goes back to the lore, and there's always
What
been.
what country is that from, the garden gnome? Is there a
Oh,
specific Eastern country it's from?
I don't know if it's Eastern European. Germany, I think, uh,
Okay.
Scandinavia.
Mhm, mhm,
Those
okay.
up there, that part. But there's always been in magic, right? Magic with a K, Crowleyan type
Mhm.
magic, ritual magic. There has been that element of the consuming of bodily fluids. In some cases, it's semen. In other cases,
It's
it's
blood.
blood. Now, a lot of groups substitute. They'll use honey. You know, I see Jerry Cthulhu's message in there that the Aztecs had a god that drank blood. Yeah, that it's in all the blood drinking is in all sorts of traditions. But I once went to when I was an agent. This had nothing to do with my work. This was Walter's own personal time. Special Agent
Mhm.
Walter, Air Force officer at Wright-Patterson. Um, I told you I had these curiosities well before I went to work for Uncle Sam. But while I was back there, I went to a ritual of a local OTO group just to observe. So I was one of about 5 or 6 observers watching this, and the guy with the helmet with the ram's horns and doing all of the stuff. And at one point in the evening, during the ritual, his wife is on the altar. She appeared to be high on something, very lasciviously dressed, just with a
Mhm.
sheer thing, clearly nude underneath. And you walk up to her if you choose to participate in the communion of this, which Mr. Adventure, I did. God knows what it latched on to me to this day. But I go up there and I stand before the altar, the half naked lady, and you say some of you probably know all that is within God is within me, that kind of thing. And then she feeds you this cookie with honey on it. I hope to gosh it was honey. And you do that, and it's like, oh, okay. So it was and then afterwards, everybody drinks coffee, eats, cinnamon rolls, and talks and hangs out, and it was interesting. But
That's bizarre.
yeah. So who knows what was in
Well,
that?
look, if it look, I have Aleister Crowley's diaries from when he lived in America, and if it was in really Aleister Crowley, it would have been crazy. It would have been
Oh
like
yeah, it would
mescaline,
have been the other
shit,
thing.
whatever, like it would have been nuts. They were all like totally high on cocaine and mescaline and
So
heroin or whatever. It is crazy. I got it for research, having guests on an older podcast, and I was looking through it, and just as it goes on, the entries get weirder, and you could tell they're using more and more drugs.
yeah, yeah.
You can totally tell. It's weird. So blood. That's really interesting that they're doing those kind of rituals. But in the book of Enoch, it's the fallen angels and these giants. How did the do you say something about the giants start eating humans?
Oh yes, that's talked about not just in the Enoch, but in the Bible. They do start consuming human flesh, drinking our blood, and that was one of the things that, according to that lore, one of the things that led to their destruction, their extermination, or so we are told. I mean, did they really? Did that really get rid of all of them? Are there, and we hear all these fun stories the last 10 years about giants found in caves in Afghanistan by soldiers. And I had to go to Afghanistan myself three times. And I wished I'd have known more about these stories of giants then, because I was working with special forces units that were up in the hills and the mountains of the passes, and all around the Hindu Kush.
Mm-hmm.
I would have tagged along, or at least tried to get some information out of them on these giants. But uh, we have the stories of vampires, right, through the
Mm-hmm.
ages, and even in our times, people claim that they encounter this, and then you have people that are again doing it for the ritualistic purposes. You have to wonder. There's been talk recently about the current living, people that are the offspring of the Nephilim DNA, right? Genetic offspring. People ask, well, are some of us, you know, possessors of that DNA, or could this explain vampires? The offspring, the lineage coming from ancient times. Could
Right.
that explain it? You know,
Yeah, it's interesting though, because we're having like there's some interesting stuff in the chat about Catholicism and blood drinking and the symbolism of like people having the wine and the bread. Like it's still there. It's supposed to be the blood of Christ, I'm assuming. I'm Anglican, but I've never gone to really church, so I don't know. Even Catholicism, my grandfather was a Catholic. I don't understand any of it. I get confused.
well, we have to remember, and so a lot of people are hypersensitive about the discussion, but remember, I forget. I wish I could remember. I need to write it down so that I have it at hand. But there was a pope, I think maybe 100 years ago or so, or whatever, and this pope was quoted as saying, "It has served us well, this myth of Christ." Now,
Hmm.
how that's supposed to be interpreted is the Roman Catholic myth of Christ is what he was referring
Right.
to. Doesn't mean that you know not saying, absolutely Christ doesn't exist, didn't exist, or whatever. It's saying that the Roman Catholic version of
Right.
the story of Christ and all the religion and stuff is greatly, and I subscribe to this. It's an invention of Rome. Okay,
Yeah.
I
Right.
think that's why the Orthodoxy historically kind of split from Rome eventually, because they go about it differently.
Well, and
And
interestingly enough, the Catholics, that kind of Bible that got agreed upon, they leave the Book of Enoch out, right?
of course they do, because they're going to take out anything that's inconvenient.
And
To
why is it inconvenient? Like what makes it like I'm like
You mean the Book of Enoch, or
yeah, why is that inconvenient for Catholicism? What's conflict with
well,
that?
yeah, Catholicism really as the I don't want to say the father of, but the creator of really all Christianity, that we know sprung from Rome, this invention of Rome. Okay,
Right.
and they have their reasons for their particular mythology, and it's a control religion, is what it is. It's all
Mhm.
about, oh, you only live. They got rid of any ideas or suggestions of reincarnation, because if you can reincarnate, the priests and the church has no power over you. But if you only live
Right.
once, and gosh, you got to do it right according to our rules so that you go to heaven. They got more control over you
Right.
because they can use the fear aspect. So things like the Book
Interesting.
of Enoch talk about truths about the past and humankind that they would rather people not know, because it takes away aspects of their control.
Right. And there's probably like is that in the Book of Enoch when they talk about the fallen angels, because they start lusting after mortal women, and of course they breed and they create these sort of, I don't know, Nephilim giant stuff that start eating humans. Was there a issue with that, or is there any kind of element like that in the sort of, like she said, like what was it, the stuff that was agreed about by the Council of Nicaea?
Or Nicaea, I think that was just a
Nicaea.
typo.
Okay, I'm trying to Nicaea. There it is. I'm like reading it wrong. No, I'm
Yeah,
not. It was a
and,
typo.
and here I go. I'm probably going to offend some folks, but you
Go
know,
ahead. They'll just have to
um,
get over it.
I presently see Christianity as we know it as one of those religions that's been around for a couple of thousand years, as whatever. And I think it's on its way to going the way of past religions that, have ascended, and, oh, it's the truth. And then after a while, people start seeing, well, let's see, your return hasn't happened. 1,000 years later, your return hasn't happened again. None of this stuff, like I know biblical scholars that'll tell you Revelations is a bunch of hogwash, that is the whole thing about the rapture and all that. It's nonsense.
Rapture's not even in the Bible.
It's yeah, exactly. It's not biblical, but you got all these people that are like, oh, here's the thing with the fallen angels. Okay, when you really, really dig into history and lore of these kinds of things, you have to ask yourself. And I froze up again. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. So
Okay.
don't close it. It'll
Yeah, I won't
connect.
close it. You have to ask yourself, one man's fallen angels, is another man's just maybe the losing side in a battle. When you have a war,
Right.
writes the history, right? And
Right.
so, what if there was some type of cosmic war? And there are other traditions that talk about that. And the so-called fallen angels are just the losing side. So they're going to be demonized. Now, one thing that the Yahwistic monotheisms do, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam do, they love to demonize their competitors. Big time, demonize the competitors. Look at their God, Yahweh, angry, wrathful, vengeful, jealous. You got to constantly be kissing his ass to get the slightest blessing. And that's doesn't sound to me like an almighty God, certainly not an almighty loving God. It sounds like a narcissist psychopath.
Who gets
And
upset about everything?
yeah, and these three religions, they just love that guy is their God. And yet Christ himself even tells the priests of, Yahweh, you are the son of your father, a liar, and a murderer, and a liar, and all that's the devil. So, me personally, I think Christ was talking about a different entity. So you have the fallen angels, of course. Oh, they're demons, they're bad. But when you look at the tradition of what they teach humanity, what's evil about teaching humanity agriculture? And one of the fallen angels taught agriculture. What's evil about?
Really?
Yeah, what's evil about teaching them? The basic foundations of civilization.
Why wouldn't God want us to know that?
Exactly. Now, another one, of course, they condemn is they also taught mankind warfare. Well, what if they taught mankind warfare to defend themselves against these invaders setting themselves up to be gods? Okay.
Wait, okay, the invader setting do you mean like aliens?
Well, Yahweh is a title. Yahweh, it was discovered that Yahweh is not a proper name like, Joe, Harry, or Kali, or Zeus. Yahweh is a title like chief or commander or boss. So it looks like, other scholars have looked at this and presented this, it looks like that Yahweh was the commander or leader of a group that came here from another world and set himself and his buddies up as gods, and he set himself up as the God. And if you want to control people, you're going to threaten them, you're going to scare the hell out of them, you're going to demand to be worshipped. And that's essentially what we're looking at when we look at the story of Jehovah and Yahweh in the Old Testament, and such. So it could be that the minions of Lucifer, who were cast into hell, these demons, the stories of whatever their origin story actually was, has been convoluted with the story of these other beings who came down to help humanity and enlighten humanity. And their brothers didn't want them doing that. Now, this has been interpreted from Sumerian texts as well, right? I mean, people like Sitchin, but also other Sumerian scholars of Sumerian mythology talk about how you had these beings on this higher, more advanced level, and some of them wanted us to be created just as worker slaves, whereas a few of them said, no, these beings have a mind, they have a spirit, they have feelings, they have a sense of identity. We don't want to treat them like slaves. And so there was conflict between the so-called God beings, right? So what if that's the source of the story of the fallen angels that were taught in Sunday school?
So you think maybe they teach us that they're bad because they gave us information that allowed us to
Yep.
become like gods?
Yeah.
Right?
Yep. And then, of course, I don't need to tell the Gnostics in here, that Yahweh, may be the demiurge. He may just be a narcissistic a-hole who set himself up as God, and it's worked for quite a
And
while.
he's not really God?
The Almighty God? No, I do
No.
not believe that Yahweh/Jehovah is the Almighty God. Not at all. I think I personally subscribe to many gods. There is one above them all. I guess that's very Greek, right? Or maybe Hindu or something. But I no longer fall for the narcissistic lie of Yahweh.
Isn't Jesus, like, when he's talking about, like, you notice a change, like when I was studying art history, the earlier depictions of Jesus, it was very lighthearted and more pious and loving. And then as you got further into Rome and Constantinople and all them taking over Christianity,
Yeah.
things start getting really harsh, and this concept of hell comes forth, and that you're being punished, and you can see it on the reliefs over the church doors where
Yeah.
like they're like Jesus is looking stern and bad, and originally Jesus wasn't like that. So
Right.
there's something going on there.
Yeah, the whole lie of the the popular vision of Christian hell, that's a lie, that's a farce. And
I don't believe that. I don't believe that. I mean, I think there might be some kind of hell, but I think we create it ourselves.
yeah, Christ, this guy, he was transformed into this wrathful. Think about it. Sounds like he was Yahweh a little bit, right? He's transformed into this wrathful, sword carrying. He's coming back to kill and slice and hack and slash and to kick butt and take names, and it just totally is incongruent with the Christ of the Gospels, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you got to decide which is it. But unfortunately, human nature leads people to go to the bloodthirsty aspect because they love their revenge. People want, a lot of people, not everyone, but a lot of, it's human nature. You want
Mm-hmm.
vindication for your beliefs and you want your
Right.
enemies vanquished. Um,
And you want to be right. You
you
want to
want to
be the
be
chosen
right.
ones or whatever the heck is
Yeah,
going on.
we see that. Unfortunately, one of the first places you see that is in the political spectrum. Now, whatever side, I'm not talking. I'm not
It's
identifying. What I'm
I,
saying is
I'm
all
just saying to everybody, it's all a stage, it's all a play. Everybody's on the same
exactly.
corrupt side. No
Yeah,
offense.
but
Listen to Shakespeare.
yeah, think about it when you get one political side, whatever it is, when they say win a big election or something, right? What they do is they tend to get full of themselves and they start going around doing the most extreme stuff because they won, blah, blah, blah. And you know what? In the United States, both sides do this. It doesn't matter which one you're on,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
both sides have their people. Well, this is a microcosm or kind of a reflection of what goes on in the religious and theological cultures too. It's people want that bloodthirsty butt kicking vindication, right? And they want their
Right.
enemies vanquished, so they embrace um, those things. And so, out of that very human thing, whatever religion it is, um, uh, grows these ideas of the bloodthirsty god, the blood drinking god, the flesh eating god, that kind of thing, because that it's just that appeals to something in human nature. And some people propose that maybe the part of human nature that appeals to is something genetic, right? The
Right.
aggressive, bloodthirsty wrath. Maybe that's a sign of this, genetic bloodline going back to the literal flesh-eating blood drinkers. It's a thought.
Right. And bloodline, like you're talking about bloodlines, I mean, we know how important that is to the royals and all
Mm-hmm.
these elite people.
Yeah.
And so what is it? What is it with blood? Like even in in Dracula movies, they say blood is the life, blood is the
Yeah.
life. What's going on with the blood? Like, is it some kind of power?
Yeah, they believe it is. For instance, if you drink the blood of your, I think I'm pretty sure the Aztecs, you drink the blood of your enemies and you get power from that. And I don't think it necessarily has to be an enemy. You drink human blood. The tradition that where the gnomes were drinking the menstrual blood of virgins from the hat, it was to get it was to lift them, kind of like a more visceral ayahuasca, you could say, right? It's supposed
Hmm.
to lift their consciousness and give them, this enlightenment. You probably have some folks in your live chat that are more, even more scholars of this than I am, and they could, put it better than I am and that I do. But it could be that. And this is what I got to in my research and my reports so far. What if it literally is, just a foodstuff, a nutrient for a race of beings that perhaps did come from another planet, and
Right.
they come here and blood is something that they need to consume. Maybe they're not, creepy vampire monsters like we put in our horror movies and such,
Right.
but they have to drink human
Have
blood.
they have to have blood to stay on the planet or something or survive here?
Yeah, they need it for maybe our sun depletes them in some way. And notice that the vampire story has
Oh,
them pale, has them, they only go out at night. What if the sun depletes them and the iron in the blood or something in the blood, keeps them going?
that's why they're doing all these chemtrails, bastards.
Mhm.
I'm kidding. Well, that could be. I mean, there's a lot of things. I mean, a lot of people think it's adrenochrome in the blood.
The adrenochrome thing that's going on, that that's, I think that is should be part of the overall discussion of all this, because you've got the thing about, like, when the Aztecs, the way they would do the violent sacrifices, it was what, to spike the emotions, and thus it spikes the blood with that special sauce, right? And there we go. And where did we learn this? Could this be one of the things we learned from the so-called fallen angels? Could it be that one of them taught some human beings blood drinking? Who knows?
It's interesting. I have a comment from Incognito here. He says, "Why do you think Putin said the vampire ball is over? Does he
I
know
don't
they're
know.
all
When
like
I heard
crazy
that,
vampires? Did
that
he? That's
right? Yeah. Did he mean literal? What did he mean? you know.
Well, hey, it's pretty creepy because there's this. I'm not going to say I did a show on the KM Mafia and stuff. There's this creepy bloodline that's been infiltrating everywhere, and it seems to be these globalists who want to expand and suck up everything.
And the whole pursuit of longevity, right? People who want to, what, from my perspective, I think it's interesting. People that want to physically live as long as they can, when I have embraced the idea. I believe that reincarnation is a real thing. So when this body dies, you'll be reborn into the next one. So why do all these things to keep a body that is particularly aging and breaking down?
Maybe they don't believe it. Maybe they're trying to
They
control something.
Yeah, maybe they don't believe in reincarnation. Maybe they buy into the whole Sunday school, you only live once, and maybe they're afraid they're going to hell, right? Who knows?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of theories about that they're actually just trying to trap people here because they don't want to. There's something about reincarnation. Some people say reincarnation's a trick too. Like you don't want to come back here. You don't want to come to Earth. You want to move on somewhere else. I don't know.
I
But
well, I what I like about that is it's we don't know until we die, and that kind of. I do agree with someone in the live chat said that Putin was probably talking about the globalists and using vampires, symbolically, metaphorically, but yeah, the folks that want to live forever, whatever's motivating them in some cases to do horrific things, must be a pretty intense belief that doing those things is going to make the difference.
yeah, well, and you know what? And this idea, if you want to live forever, and that's totally tied to the vampire myth and blood drinking, right? If you want to live forever, it's that's all ego
Yeah,
talking. It's like that's your ego that's afraid of death. That's
yeah.
afraid of what's beyond there. And maybe it's because
Or
it ceases to be. I don't know.
I think there you hit on it. I one of the things, ceasing to exist. I'm not afraid that I'm going to go to some hell. That's ridiculous. Um, I think the two things that no, I try not to let them keep me awake at night, but just to use that phrase, the two things that bother me about death, the only two things are, I don't want to leave my loved ones needing or in the lurch. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to leave them in a feel in a bad state or whatever. But also the idea of ceasing to exist. It's really weird. A lot of people say, "Well, you wouldn't know, so it doesn't make the difference." But when you're alive, and I think, "Ooh, oh, ceasing to exist." No, 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 no. And maybe that's just the human drive to stay alive, right? Maybe that's just that
Mm-hmm.
thing we have in us that is what keeps us, the fight or flight thing, right? Oh, stay alive, stay alive. Of course you're going to stay alive. You're a living animal being.
Well, when my grandmother passed away, that was the thing. Like it's like a 3 months. The first 3 months is really intense, and that's what the thing was in what that was bothering me the most was like that she didn't exist anymore. I was like, where'd she go? She just doesn't exist. And yeah, it was a really weird thing. Like she always was there, and then suddenly, poof, she just doesn't exist.
Gone,
And that
right?
was a hard thing for my mind to wrap my head around. Like she
Yeah.
doesn't exist anymore. This is so weird. This is a
I
weird concept.
I think that there are things that we're not going to be given the easy answer. There are things that um, we have to come to on our own, and the things that make us cross our own Rubicon. Okay.
Mhm.
And when you reach that, I reached that about 15 years ago with an experience I had. And that was the first point in my life where I realized, you know what? It doesn't matter who does or does not believe me in the things I've experienced or the things that I think. It doesn't matter if I convince anyone else. I'm convinced. And so
Right.
these are the kinds of things. What happens to us after death, I think, is in that realm. And I think that's by design. Think about that. That works whether you're a traditional, religious person, like a Christian or whatever you
Catholic
are.
or
Yeah.
right.
Or if you're someone who's, like a Hindu or who just you believe in reincarnation, because I personally think that this life is meant to we're here to hone and improve and test our character. Yes, I do think that it matters how we behave here. If you're going to be a narcissist asshole, you're not behaving very well, okay? And
Mhm.
you should suffer for that. You absolutely should be punished and
So
suffer for that.
we
Uh,
have an interesting question from Renee, Mrs. John aside. She says, "What are your beliefs of energy vampires?" So we're not talking about like actual blood. We're talking about energy. Is that different? Is that a thing?
I think there's a spectrum on that, and on the extreme end of the spectrum, I think it's a literal science fiction-y paranormal kind of thing where there are beings, be it human beings or humanoid type being, whatever, that can literally suck the life force out of you. But for the most part, I think it's people, speaking of narcissists, who get into your psyche and they drag you down and they manipulate you and they suck the life out of you that way, and they get something out of it. You know,
Yeah.
it amazes me how narcissism is a serious, real thing that we can identify, and yet you're kind of forbidden to bring it up in a court of law. That's
Yeah,
a little
no,
weird to
it
me.
doesn't. It doesn't. The courts don't understand personality disorders, and of course, they're real. They're in the DSMV.
Yeah,
They're there, but the court
or
doesn't recognize that they're actually being used as a manipulation tool as
uh,
well.
or the narcissist in the court system, of
Mm-hmm.
course, want to protect themselves and their buddies that are also, this
Psychopaths and
way. But
narcissists.
when you're in Western civilization, and again, I'm not trying to harp on religion, but this is part of this conversation. And you're constantly told that this, if you're in one of the Yoistic monotheisms, you know, uh, Judaism, Christianity, or Islam, and you're taught that your God is this vengeful, wrathful, kiss his ass or you shall be crushed. Um, you know, this,
I'd be scared to die.
what's that?
I'd be scared to die if that's what I thought.
Yeah, but this affects how we develop our legal systems. This affects how we this is
Deliver
reflected in our
justice.
society, right? Um,
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's interesting. I never thought about that.
of course, look at societies that are warmongering. Yeah, I'm a military officer. I went and did my part in war zones and stuff like that. I am willing to go and make war on an enemy if I really believe that it's the right thing to do. But I'm appalled at the idea of, serving a military-industrial complex empire. You know, and
Yeah.
so while sometimes making war is a necessary thing, okay, um,
Yeah.
to live for that is part of this wrathful, vengeful, bloodthirsty tradition.
Yeah, and it's also they create the scenarios and the trauma in order to go to war. It's all fake scenarios. They create the terrorists, they create everything just so they can go to
They can,
war.
yeah.
So it's not war because someone's really invading you. They make sure that you know, they
Well,
make
well.
sure this happens.
Here's what I learned. Terrorists are real, but not every terrorist threat that they spin us up about is real. See, um, and you could say that about a lot. There's a lot of bad things out there in the world. Thieves are real, but not everybody is a thief, right? But
That's right.
here's the thing: the controllers, they want to use the fear of these things to control you, right? So this is something that an energy vampire, so to speak, would do. They use fear. The energy vampire absolutely uses fear. So energy vampirism connects to blood vampirism in the whole adrenochrome thing, right? The whole Aztec sacrifice where you spike the fear and terror of the victim so that it affects the blood.
Yeah. It's really interesting. And I had a show where we talked about like that war creates like a psychic leash, like it creates an energy that they feed on, and it's hysterical. It's almost like a mass sacrifice of blood.
Yeah. Yeah, and when you get into, think about it, when you get into that mode where it's the fight mode, that is a particular frame of mind. You know, I was somebody one of many, many people, who carried a badge and a gun, right? And when you
Hmm.
get a job like that, you have the authority to use lethal force. It's a very, very serious responsibility, and unfortunately, there are people in the job who mishandle it or abuse it. But when you get to the point, when you get to that stage where your hand has to go to the gun and you think you're being
Hmm.
faced with something like that, that's a very that's a very interesting and particular frame of mind that you get in, because what does
Right.
it lead to? It might lead to that point where you make that hopefully cool-headed decision to draw that weapon and use it. And
Right.
and there are things going on in your head when you're in situations where you might have to do that, or you do that, and it is this kind of different it's this different level to be on. And sometimes it is so intense for the human animal in their psyche that it can cause the tunnel vision, right? That gets a police officer or a soldier killed. The tunnel vision meaning you're not keeping your peripheral senses up at the same time. When I was in, here's a quick example. When I was in Kabul, one of the times I was in Afghanistan, I had a guy come at me with a sword, try to kill me with a sword, run a sword through my head on Chicken Street. And
Wow.
I get out of the car, I cleared leather, I drew on this guy. And, but in the few seconds that I had his wrist trapped in my door frame, and he's moving his arm around and just trying to hack that sword at my head. The blade's coming within a couple of inches. Believe it or not, my inside, I was very calm, and I'm thinking the whole time, okay, I'm going to shoot this guy through the window glass here, and then I'm going to run up Chicken Street and then make that right and haul ass as fast as I can to our compound. And so then I couldn't use my rifle because it was a small car. So I knew I had to use
Hmm.
my sidearm. So anyway, he pulls away from the car. I barrel out. I draw on him. And while I'm drawing on him and watching him, a couple of people are holding him back. It turned out to just be an angry old Pashtun guy who got fed up with all us Westerners walking around with guns on his street. I get that. Those were volatile times. But here's the thing: the whole time I'm doing this, I'm also looking to the right or left, peripheral vision, turning my head quick. I'm also keeping an eye because somebody might come up to my side or behind me. So I'm controlling my perspective so that I'm not tunnel visioning. Because the natural thing is protect my life, protect my life, protect my life, do violence to the
Yeah.
threat, right? If I have to, tunnel vision
Eliminate
on
it.
that, right? That's the threat, and someone could come up to me and shove a bayonet in me or a gun to my head, whatever. You get the idea. So this was one of my experiences with how intense the life or death situations can be. And
So
so
some crazy energy gets created.
yes, exactly. So let's say there was an energy and blood vampire there, right? Let's say this was in the daytime. Let's say it was at nighttime, and there was a vampire there, right? He could have drugged me into the alley, right? And in drinking my blood, he would have got that extra spike or whatever that was there. Even though I was
Right.
remaining calm and I didn't have to shoot anybody that day, that's always a good
You
day.
still would have had adrenaline and everything
Oh, of
rushing through your
course,
system.
of course, it was spiked. So you know, it's um, it's interesting. And then there's blood types.
Oh, what about RH? Was it O negative? What's up with that?
I'm O negative, and that's an Rh negative blood. O negative is the universal donor. Now, if something happens to me, I can't take any blood except O negative, but everybody else with all the different blood types can take my blood.
Interesting.
O negative is the universal donor. Now, I've wondered, when you look at religious stories and stuff, like for instance, was this Christ guy, this Jesus guy, did he have O negative blood because his blood saves all, so to speak? Was it just merely that he had the type blood that was the universal donor? And is this how the mythology of the blood that saves all, grew into this big religious idea? I don't know. But I find, did O negative blood, did it come from somewhere else? Or some people say, was it the original blood of this world and the others came from somewhere? That's a whole wild discussion.
Yeah,
Do
interesting.
do the blood drinkers, do they pick only people with certain blood types? Do they prefer certain blood types? Are O negative, um, are we in danger of the vampires wanting our blood? Or, who knows?
Right. I'm O positive. I don't know what my son is. My ex-husband was O negative.
Mm-hmm.
My son, I don't actually know what he is. No, they never even tested or told me. Jared says, why is it that most concentration of RH blood, negative blood types, are from the Basque region?
Yeah,
Interesting.
that's very interesting, and that speaks to, Jerry. That speaks to the O negative blood being going way way back. Now, um, I have the Spanish Basque region uh, genetics. So I maybe that's where my O negative comes from. But yeah, that's because the Basques, some scholars think that they were remnants of whatever this Atlantean empire was. Okay, whatever
Right.
whatever this lost civilization was that explains Atlantis, the myth of Atlantis grew from. There's reason to think that maybe the Basques are one of the surviving subcultures or frontier or colonists, not in the bad way. I don't mean the evil colonists. Um, but that there's an interesting angle on the whole blood thing. But
I wonder what type of bloodline, like, there's got to be all blood. Like, I can't imagine, because I know, like, in the elites, we're talking about bloodlines in the elites,
Mhm.
they tend to interbreed. And a lot of people say, oh, Diana was a commoner and Kate Middleton's a commoner. And I went and looked at that up, and they actually, I don't know what kind of commoner you think they are, but they go up to royal bloodlines.
Yes, they do.
Both of them do.
They wouldn't have been approved. I mean, isn't that part of the problem with Meghan Markle is that she's
Yeah.
not? So you know, Now,
Yeah.
you get into the whole thing about the royal bloodlines. Is it Edward? His last name's DeVere, and the book is across the room, so I can't get at it from here. But he wrote. He was an interesting guy. He was associated with Tracy Twyman, the late Tracy Twyman, for a while. So it's that DeVere, and he wrote a book on this. And I'm sure somebody in the live chat knows exactly the book I'm talking about. But it's very interesting. That's one of the sources that I got the thing about the red gnome hats from.
Oh, the
Gnomes. What's interesting
gnome.
about gnomes is they did not start out as little. The thing that was done to the fairy folk was done to them. The people that eventually overpowered the original culture that were the gnomes. They
They
have to
turn
be
them into
little
little
rosy.
cute things.
Yeah, exactly, right. And similar to the fairy folk, they weren't tiny little. I mean, there are these tiny little creature things that are part of the tradition, but like the Tuatha and such, and the gnomes, they were normal size, um, but over time they reduced and combined with other tradition. Because I think there are the little beings, the little races of beings, and they get convoluted. But yeah, I think that blood type probably plays a role in this blood drinking thing. I think we can all agree that the whole adrenochrome thing obviously plays a role in it. Some of the traditions talk about it, may not use that word, but that's really what they're talking about when you think about it.
Right. Well, and then what's interesting about the elites is, and I find it interesting, it's almost like a curse of their obsession because they get so obsessed with inbreeding and bloodlines that they inbreed, and they start coming up with some not so nice diseases. And one of the
Right.
diseases that happens is what is it called again? Hemophilia,
Mm-hmm.
where they can't clot and stuff like that. It happens when you in these genetics. And one of the interesting things about adrenochrome and synthetic adrenochrome is it clot the blood, I think.
Hmm.
It'll kind of counteract that. I just thought that was interesting. But yeah, like in I think it's Queen Victoria from her line, and it showed up in the Russian royal family because their son, the
Mm-hmm.
czar's son, had hemophilia.
Mm.
And it
Okay.
shows up, and a whole bunch of other diseases like show up when in disfigurements and mental retardation and everything when you breed your bloodlines too close.
Yeah, that's why we try for that not to happen. I think in the United States, that's why you can marry a second cousin and further
So
removed. You can
creepy.
marry second,
It's so
third,
creepy.
fourth cousin. Yeah, well, it's my both sides of my family. One side came from West Virginia, another from Alabama. I've dated cousins, but I like to
Are
throw
you?
that out there.
You seriously dated your cousin?
I've no. I did not.
I'm like, you
I've
got to be
had.
clear on that one. You got to
Oh
be
no, there
precise.
no. There's been serious flirtations with second and third cousins. You
Oh
know,
my goodness. I was
but
gonna move to West Virginia, but I ain't dating no cousins. Yeah. Um, there's just a lot of
oh,
more
but
options outside of
people,
that.
people used to, by the time you get to second and third and fourth, it's not. It's not like a sibling or a first. A first cousin is about as close as you can get to a sibling without it be, right?
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
second cousin and third, third being like the child of one of your parents' cousins. So it's far enough in the tree there that. But we have a reason for having to set that boundary, right? Because of what you're talking
Mhm.
about. This is why siblings should not breed. This is why first cousins shouldn't, because there's practical reasons, not so
Right.
much mystical reasons, but practical reasons. I mean, but then there's a reason why it weirds people out, because it
Mhm.
really depends on how, if you grew up with these people around you, it's weird because they are like siblings. But if you didn't, And I'm saying this because, think about the royals. I'm sure that with them, there are cousins that they've never interacted with, never met, right? So they do not.
It's duty.
Yeah, it seems like they're not a relative because, yeah, sure, we're
Well,
cousins, but we
it,
never met.
it's duty, and there's a lot of royals who actually say, and there's a lot of people that are up in these big families, whether it's Rothschild, that like one of them said, what did she say? It was she said it in French. She said, "Vice is nice, but incest is best." But it's their duty. That's literally what she said. That they believe because they keep it tight. I showed it on one of my shows. Her actually saying this, and the thing is a lot of them say it is like a curse. Everyone thinks, oh, you're wealthy and this and all this stuff, but you're actually a slave. You're not free. And
Yeah,
they're like, they wouldn't wish it on, some of them wouldn't wish it on anyone. They're like, you don't know what you're asking for that kind of, at that level of power, at that level of wealth.
yeah, right. Yeah. So
Because you are pretty much, yeah, you're serving the family and screw your own stuff.
it's like your
I
life at the
wanted to,
top.
yeah, I wanted to talk about, like, since we're talking about elite still and the blood drinking, and vampires and stuff like that, um, the whole idea of Dracula and the vampire,
Hmm.
with this idea that a noble man, a noble prince, is this vampire that's feasting upon the peasants.
Right.
I find that really interesting.
Oh yeah, sure. And think about it. That came out of, it really, this idea had kind of been out there in literature and mythology, and of course Bram Stoker brings it all together. And then greatly the guy, I can't think of his name, gosh darn it, but the guy that wrote the famous Broadway play, which became, the movie Dracula that we all know.
Oh, right. Hamilton Dean.
Hamilton Dean, thank you. Yes.
You're welcome.
And so that it kind of coalesced everything into this classic. This is what the vampire is, and the fact that he's a kind of a aristocrat, right? Well,
Hmm.
there's the symbology of the energy vampire, right? The
Hmm.
elite who feeds off the peasants and the serfs, and he sucks the life out of them. This is a reflection of, the days of serfdom and the oh my gosh, I'm doing a brain dump. The feudal system, right?
Yeah, yeah.
There were still memories of that, at the time that Bram Stoker wrote his novel, and then of course by the time Hamilton Dean makes the play, because remember, Napoleon Bonaparte is the one who, was credited with finally ending the feudal system. And when you think, his time on the world stage influencing civilization ended by 1815. So, by the time you get to the 1890s, there's still in literature and living people, and it's still close to the era of, the elites using the serfs. And in the industrial age, there was just the commercial version of that, right? With the
Hmm.
rail barons and with the the rise of the corporations. They sucked the life out of the common people because just using them to death in the factories and things like that. Um, the more things change, the more they stay the same, right? So
Yeah.
this is something that, yeah. In the case of, by the time we get to Dracula, you've got not only the idea of the aristocrat who's sucking the life out of the common people, but you've also got the sexual kind of. It really was the beginning, in a way. The Victorian era, right, was the beginning of the modern sexual revolution because all that suppression, right, um,
Hmm.
is reflected in that novel. Stephen King, in Dance Macabre, which is one of his best books, and what it is a nonfiction book length series of essays on the horror genre in literature, film, and TV and such. And he does some great analysis of Bram Stoker's Dracula, and he says that it's about it's about sexuality. It's also about the forbidden sexuality. It's
Mhm.
also about the elites sucking the life out of people, and then of course there's the blood drinking, you know, um, theme of it that appealed to Stoker and has always been part of the classic horror vampire theme. And this may be the product of ages of ancient memories of some beings that came from somewhere else and would literally drink blood. Um,
Yeah. Well, and the figure that Dracula is based off of, loosely, Vlad the Impaler, ironically, as has been mentioned in our chat,
yeah,
is related to the current King Charles III and that royal family. They're
yeah.
all tied.
Isn't that
So I'm not trying to say that King Charles III is going to go around impaling people. Maybe that's why he's trying to be so nice to Muslims in his country and let them invade their whole entire culture. I don't know. But it's interesting that there is
interesting?
this link there, and that you know, I'll just say this: I'd never trust a royal or anyone with power.
Oh, hey,
My blood.
I was pretty much raised this way, and I think by my very nature, I'm very much, I like to say I'm. That's one of the multiple ways I'm American. The way I look at it is, I have no use for any monarchy or the idea of royals. I think it's an arrogant human institution, and But then again, both sides of my family were here during the revolution
Hmm.
and participated in that. So,
Hmm.
the way I look at it is, I remember in what year was it, 80 or 81, when Charles and Diana got married, and the royal wedding preempted TV for the whole friggin' day. And I remember that. I mean, I was only like what, 17 or 18 then, just right out of high school. And that kind of pissed me off that there were so many Americans fascinated with a royal wedding and that it had to suck up the better part of a whole day on our TV. I'm like, what Americans should even care about this? But yet, oh my gosh, they did. So that's where I come from on that.
Yeah, and like people are saying, is there any evidence that Chavez was a blood drinker? And
Oh
I'm saying
no.
there's not. There's a lot of propaganda and
Yeah.
woodcut propaganda out there, but he was definitely violent, and he learned that from the Turks.
Yeah, I think Stoker just used him as as a source for the aristocratic line for his
Yeah.
character. Now there is a guy who I should have his name right over here. I wrote about him in my book about Sir Richard Francis Burton's Guy de Rye. Guy de Rye, who might have been an ancestor of um, Burton or his wife. Guy de Rye was a man who was a knight, and he was put on trial for, he was accused of the torture and murder and worse things of several young boys. And I think there was the accusation of cannibalism or blood drinking in that. Um, interesting, interesting character. And he could have been even more so, or just as much, a source for Stoker's Dracula as Vlad Tepes. So if you look at,
Yeah, and well, and his what was it? Stoker's was the manager for Henry Irving, the actor, who
yeah,
was a total narcissist. So he's kind of mixing him with a whole bunch of other
sure,
figures and
yeah,
characters. So Dracula is like this figure, but I just find it interesting that you know the elite sort of aristocrats in there, and today we talk about all these elites who are doing these rituals and child trafficking and adrenochrome and all this stuff. I'm like,
yeah,
human trafficking is probably bigger than it's ever been. It's like huge
sure,
business.
sure, yeah, yep.
Incognito says, "Don't tell me you're impaling thousands of people and not sampling in those days." Maybe he did a little bit. You never know. But there is an aristocrat who was doing some crazy crap with blood, and that's Elizabeth Bathory.
Yes. Yes, she was. She would bathe in the blood of young women, right? To keep her, she believed it kept her youthful. There's been, a couple of cool movies made from that story over the years. One was a Hammer horror film.
That was a good movie.
Yeah, it's a fun one. And there's been some more recently. But yeah, so this stuff with blood, it's a real thing, and people are. You go through history and you find these examples of this, and you wonder, where are they learning this? Did Elizabeth Bathory get this idea independently, or did a mother or an aunt or some other ancestor do the same thing, and we just heard about Elizabeth?
Well, and what's funny with their obsession with blood, we can kind of poo-poo it, but there is like modern science and medicine are starting to find out things about blood and placenta and all this different stuff. You see blood facials, people poking the skin and letting it bleed and heal and revitalize. Like there is something there.
Sure. It makes sense, but I think what it is it depends upon your use of it. Some practices are by their very nature more gruesome, than others. Blood transfusion, when you think about that if it was presented a different way, that could be kind of creepy, right? Um, Pumping your blood or one person's blood into it. I mean,
Yeah.
what could that do to their, genetic line? What are the studies on that? Has anybody? I'm just wondering this now. I never thought about this, but I'd like to know if there's been interesting reports of an increase in somebody's perhaps paranormal experiences following a transfusion, a serious transfusion. That would be
Well,
an interesting
hey,
study.
people have near death experiences and come back and have all sorts of psychic weird experiences. So
Mm-hmm.
why not a blood transfusion, right?
Yeah. So you have to wonder if there's things happening like that we're not hearing about. I heard years ago when I had a part-time job in a hospital. I heard that that was the first time I heard the stories that surgeons and people that work in operating rooms have reported seeing some pretty bizarre things, but it's in that category you don't talk about it
Right.
because you're focusing on doing your job. But things like seeing the soul image of the person slide out from their feet, they're on the table and just kind of hovering there during the surgery. And that, the story I heard was, a nurse kind of looked over and said, "Doctor, do you see that?" And he says, "Get your eyes back on your job," you know. And then later he said, "Yes, I saw it. I've seen that more than once." But these, of course,
Yeah.
are tales that you hear, and
It's somewhere they're not allowed to go because it's out of the scope of their understanding and education,
yeah, exactly.
right?
And they're supposed to be keeping their mind on the surgery, right? So,
Mm-hmm. Well, and what's really weird, is they're saying that Bathory might have been some smear campaign, and I don't doubt that there was a lot of smear campaigns. But then I say, okay, so anyone who could come up with the drink and blood smear campaign, people who smear campaign, a lot of times it's projection. So I'm like, if someone came up with that stuff and was smear campaigning certain royals, I gotta wonder what they were up to because a lot of
sure.
times smear campaigns are projections.
Yeah, sometimes, yeah, that's true. But then other times it's you just want to think of something vile to
The
accuse,
worst,
something you'd
horrible
never do.
Christian thing, right?
Yeah, or
So
whatever.
I know, like, I want to go way back actually to just tie this show up because you were talking about Egypt and stuff, like way before Christianity. That blood drinking, does it feature in there where they talk about beings or creatures that drink your blood that are like the Nephilim or that are like these giants or like vampires?
I Egyptian stuff.
Yeah. Do they have any kind of figures? Like, because I know a lot of stuff that we have, we think, oh, we're Christians and whatever, but we're actually absorbing in a, like, there's still paganism in Christianity.
Oh,
So
of
I'm
course.
wondering if there's like these figures even far back into Egypt, even farther, that have inspired even the Book of Enoch or
Well,
whatever.
I think that's what I'm saying. Every culture has their version, of the blood drinking entity I'm being or such. Uh, I'm present. I don't recall the Egyptian one though. Did I talk about the Egyptian one in the?
I think you might have just mentioned a figure or character in there,
Yeah,
but
that
I
one's
can't be too
escaping me right
sure.
now. Of
It's
course,
okay.
I mentioned in Hinduism, the whole thing about Kali,
Kali.
and
Yeah.
the followers will, depending upon how devoted they are. See, that's the other thing is you have a tradition, and maybe
Hmm.
most followers of the tradition, to most followers of Kali, that's just a symbolic, metaphorical representation of her as the destroyer, you know, um, idea, her destroyer aspect. But it's only the real severe, more over the line crazy followers like the thuggies that would get into the murder and human sacrifice and that kind of thing. It's like in any religion, you know. Here in North America, you have, again. I'm not trying to beat up on Christians, but that's there's a lot of Christians here. Um, most most Christians are just really just decent people who go to their church every Sunday, and they do
Hmm.
nice things for their community, and they
Right.
try to be good people and raise their kids. It's only the real fanatics, the ones who start thinking that everybody else should live the way I live, and
Right.
I'm going to make them. That's where it becomes a problem. And this is similar to, like, in Kali worship, it's the ones who think, oh, I must literally go out and be a destroyer. I must literally go shred somebody and consume their blood and their organs and that kind of thing. And those are the fanatics. Those are the crazy people. And what do? It's always the radicals who ruin it for everybody else, ruin something that's otherwise harmless, or maybe otherwise a positive
Right.
influence. It's the
Well,
radicals who ruin it for everyone else. And this is
that's
where we
that's
see blood
that's
drinkers.
with that's with Islam. I mean, they're like, if you don't convert and do
Yeah,
our
convert or
really
die.
rigid way, we're gonna
Well,
chop your head off.
yeah, and we have a similar thing like that in Christianity. Christian nationalism is fascistic.
But do Christian nationalists really want to blow you up and chop your head off? I've never
No,
heard them
but
say that.
they want to eradicate people who they don't approve of. Um, and I know that's real sensitive right now because we got some of those people, in places I never thought they'd reach. They tried to get there with Nixon. He told them to pound sand. They thought they were going to get there with Ronald Reagan. And God bless Ron Dog. He smiled and said, "No, ain't gonna work." And so that's a whole other show. But
Yeah, for
their
sure.
brand of, in Islam you have the convert or die radicals. In you know in Christianity you have the ones who are truly want a theocracy, and they move into fascism. So every tradition, every group has its problem children. You know, um, I'm generally a conservative guy, but I recognize if there's people in my own camp that I think are problem children, I'm going to call them out. I'm not just going to say my side right or wrong. Um, and I think when you get into these spiritual traditions and religions and stuff, you have that more radical element that wants to please the god so much that they go too far. And I think this is where these creepy practices come from, like in the ancient Aztecs. You had the Maya. Not that they didn't have human sacrifice, because they did kind of dip into that, but generally, no, they didn't do that. In the original idea of sacrifice was, kind of more like a harvest kind of thing. But then you had these wrathful, vengeful, bloodthirsty Aztec guys that come along, and in their tradition, it is literally the
Right.
you know
Well, and
horrific.
it really depends who's ruler, especially if you have like a feudal type
Yes,
of system.
yes,
Whoever's ruler, you could get some guy who's really radical that shows
yes.
up that had a bad parent, or they were left with a nanny. I don't know what the hell. Some of these elites, they're schooled in weird stuff in the schools in England. They whip them and do all sorts of weird things.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
you could just get some really crazy king that comes in and he just starts going bonkers and he's paranoid.
yeah. Exactly, exactly. And look at look at look at Germany and Adolf Hitler. He was a radical fanatic. Really showed his true colors. But initially, he came in and was going to do all these great, wonderful things, and then we know what happened there, and it unfortunately led a lot of the folks there, to go along with it rather than say, "Hey, wait a minute." I look at. I don't know why. For some reason, I just thought of the movie Star Trek Five: Final Frontier, and that wonderful scene, which a lot of people can take a lesson from, when they supposedly encounter God, right? And Kirk is the only one who says, "Excuse me, wait a minute." Even Spock is wondering, "Is this God?" Bones, he's all into it, and they're all in awe. But Kirk is the only one that says, "What is what does God need a starship for?" And he gets smited, right, for dare asking, and he goes, "Why are you angry? You're God." you know,
Mhm.
and God says, "Who are you?" And he goes, "Wait, don't you know? Aren't you God?" And he's the one that says, "Hey, this is not God. This is this angry, wrathful, being that's
Right.
willing to smite you and kill you if you dare question." And so, again, you could look at some of these bloodthirsty sacrifice practices as a way to scare the peasantry. I mean, I'm sure when the Aztecs put on their shows of their sacrifices, part of that was so that the elites could keep the peons scared to death that they might be the next one up on the altar. So there's a combination of using the blood sacrifice, the bloodthirstiness, again, as kind of a form of an energy vampire, right? Because you're
Mhm.
stoking the fear in your peasants to keep them in line. And this is what people use, these supernatural beings for a lot of times. So
Yeah, it's interesting. So that's kind of blood drinkers and these kind of angels. There's this kind of link there to the false god. That's a good
yeah,
way
yeah,
to
and
tie
when
it
you
up.
have something horrific, and so in the days of the frontier, the pioneers, right? You tell your kids, "Oh no, there's a monster in the woods. He'll eat you." Well, that was their way of keeping their kids out of the woods at night, so the bears or a wolf or a mountain lion
Right,
wouldn't get them, right? And you
right.
exaggerate this threat so that you keep your young
Well,
ones safe.
also so the young children actually understand it,
Yes, yeah,
because
the danger, so that
the
they'll understand
context,
it.
right?
So
Well, it's really interesting. I personally believe, like all these really radical figures, even Hitler, I believe that the system creates them. Like
sure,
our whole ancestor creates them. Like Hitler wouldn't have risen if they didn't have a World War One that decimated Germany and the Kaiser got off and took off. And
right,
then, like all these things are connected,
but
and we create these radicals and then we adore them and they come in, and of course they are the radicals, so it goes crazy, and then we're like, oh shit.
well, the radicals take advantage of a circumstance and a situation. Think about all the millions of people who had to endure and were affected by, say, World War One, but only a few took advantage of that the way Hitler and them did. So they're really, it's still, even though even though events, society, or whatever might have created the atmosphere for this to emerge, it's still, the individuals, the perpetrators of this, are still accountable, because there's millions of other people who didn't go that severe. There's millions of other people that didn't go that radical or kept themselves in check. So, it comes
Hmm.
back to individual accountability.
Yeah, maybe. I still think that it's all connected because he can't be a radical, he can't have power without the people engaging with him. And then of course
Oh,
there's always
true, true.
propaganda,
Yeah,
right? There's this weird play that there's this
yes,
area weird play, and there's a whole bunch of things going on in Germany that was really crazy at the time that made it the prime situation for
yes,
that to happen. I see that in certain other places, like even my country where I came from. I think there's weird stuff at play there that
yeah.
makes it good for a nation to be taken over by weird radical people who are pretending to be liberal.
And it can happen here too. And
Yeah.
and
It's why it doesn't matter who's in, whether it's a conservative or a liberal, you always have to hold them to the fire and question all of their moves,
exactly, remain
regardless.
vigilant. You have to remain
Yes,
vigilant.
exactly.
So,
They're politicians, they're humans, they're mortals, they're
uh,
going to make mistakes, and they are up in the place of power, which is very dangerous.
and staying vigilant with your not being in certain places when the sun goes down, and having your garlic strings up, right, and having your little
Oh,
things is
yeah.
how you're going to stay vigilant against blood drinkers.
What's up with holy water too? Yeah, like there's these things that we can protect ourselves with from these blood drinkers. Is that a real thing? Do you think we can?
I think it has its roots in a real thing. I mean, I think maybe there's something about the properties of garlic, which
Mhm.
could be where the whole garlic thing comes from. I think the religious symbolism thing is a little bit silly. And in the movie The Mummy from 1998 or nine, you remember that one scene where the mummy's coming at the nerdy little guy, and he's got the necklace,
He's
and he's
yeah,
got a
he's
cross,
holding up
he's
every
got a Star
symbol.
of David. Yeah, he's got all of them, thinking one of these will work. Really none of them, you know, do.
Yeah.
But
I
but I think the
think
garlic
it
thing and the
would.
light thing,
It
yeah.
might. It might if the thing that was attacking you believed it. Maybe I don't know.
Maybe it would have to be, again, that's why he was holding up all those things, because which faith is this particular monster, but there might have
That's
something,
funny,
the thing with the sunlight certainly could have a root, in something
right?
legit, because literally solar rays and the properties of the ultraviolet rays, that kind of thing could affect one of these people. The garlic, again, that could
Lamb's.
be a property. So
Jaren, the audience said lamb's blood on the door. I think is that like a Jewish tradition
yeah,
to
well,
use the door
yeah,
with lamb's blood?
it was they would put it, I think they would put it on the door of where there was the firstborn son or something, and the hand of death would either, I can't remember if it protected them from the hand of death or if it drew the hand of death, the blood over the door frame. Somebody would have to, I think it was protective, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not sure.
Yeah, right. Yeah, like there is that. And then of course there's inviting the vampire into your house. Yeah,
Yeah,
like you invite these things in apparently in
yeah,
some
and
of these
that comes from
stories.
the demonic tradition, that you have to let a demon in. A fun little story. My mentor for several years, he and his second wife, my aunt, they lived in a house her family owned that was built in 18. It was pre-Civil War, it was an antebellum mansion, and
Mm,
it was a spooky house, believe me, and it was haunted. I think we've talked about that before. And so
I
one
think
time
so.
yeah, I arrived on a visit, and I get there at dusk, right? The sun's going down, and they're not home. So I'm by myself there outside waiting for them to get home. Now, the door's unlocked, and I could go inside, but I'm waiting outside because that house was spooky. Here I am, 6 foot one, 30 something years out old, a big bad federal agent. I ain't going in that house alone. But I'm sitting there, and I get up. There's rocking chairs, talk about classic. And I'm standing at the top of the steps, and I'm waiting for them to get back, and the sun's just peeking over the horizon. And I happen to look, and hanging on the pillars where the porch steps come up are
Mhm.
strings of dried garlic. And I'm like, what? And I look around, and there's other strings of garlic hanging outside, and I'm like, "Oh, you got to be kidding!" And of
Wow.
course, my uncle laughed at me. He goes, "That's where we dry our garlic."
Oh, you're thinking vampire, and they're like,
Yeah,
no,
well,
we're
think about it. This
literally, this is
spooky
practical.
house, the sun's going down. I don't want to go in because there's ghosts in there, but outside the sun's coming down, and here's garlic hanging. Anyway,
So,
it just goes to show you the power of superstition. And like
right,
I said,
and myth.
here I am in my 30s. I'm a 200-pound, 6'1" man with a gun. And still in my head is all that stuff that I've been taught all my life.
Vampire lore.
Stories, and you wonder. You're like, well, could it be true in that moment?
It very well could be, but I think a lot of those people are, I don't know. There's practicality when you have to live out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you say that your family comes from West Virginia. Good state to live in. I know
Yeah,
it's
half
cheap
of
to
them
live
West
in.
Virginia, the other half Alabama and Savannah, Georgia, and all that.
Oh,
Louisiana.
Savannah, Georgia. I want to go to Savannah, Georgia.
Oh,
I
it's
have never
wonderful.
been.
Yeah.
Oh, nice. So yeah, I was like, I was like, we should just sell our house and outright buy a house in West Virginia and live in the mountains and retire and hide from everybody.
There you go.
That's funny. Yeah, that's interesting. I'm gonna tie this up. We've been an hour and a half. You're still
Wow.
kind of you're frozen here.
Yeah, I
We
know.
we
That's
can
weird. I
still
don't
hear
know
you.
what's
I
going
don't know
on.
what's happening, but before we sign out, is there any other important element about these blood drinkers that I've missed that to drive across about the legend of them, the Book of Enoch, fallen angels? I'm not sure if I've missed anything.
No, I think we pretty much covered the basics. As I continue in this research, I'll have more,
Hmm.
to say about it, and it is something that I find interesting. So for now, yeah, I think
All right.
we got a good start
So,
on that.
and then to end it up, who is your favorite character in Dark Shadows and why?
Oh, that's kind of it's two of them to me, Barnabas and Quentin. You can't beat
Hmm.
those episodes where Barnabas and Quentin were when Barnabas finally convinced Quentin that he was a friend. They
Right.
just
They
had such a
love.
dynamic. Honestly, I feel like they lost an opportunity. They should have done a Dark Shadows movie that took place in the 1890s, where Barnabas and Quentin
Mm.
are the main characters. And I believe this so much that I've actually started writing admittedly, I guess you'd qualify it as fan fiction because I can't sell it, can't make any money. But I've started writing my own Dark Shadows novel a couple of years ago, and when I'm done with it, I'm going to put it out there for people to read for free. But it's Quentin and Barnabas on some mystical arcane adventure in the 1890s.
That sounds really cool. At first I didn't like this actress. She kind of annoyed me at first, but then she grew on me, and then she had so many other characters and all the
I know
alternate.
who you're
But
talking
I
about.
always loved Grayson Hall.
Oh, of
I
course,
always
Grayson
loved.
Hall. Yeah,
I
I
always
thought
loved
you were.
Grayson Hall as Julia.
Yeah, she was wonderful, absolutely. And really, to me, the team was Barnabas, Quentin, Julia, and Dr. Stokes. That would have made one heck of a movie.
Oh
But
yeah, what was the
Angelique,
actor's name?
Angelique
Angelique was great.
bothered the hell out of me initially, but then she grew on me
Yeah.
as they developed her character. I
I
liked Evan Handley, the alchemist.
Yeah. I think the reason that the Julia character bothered me is she was always trying to interfere in Barnabas and
Right. Well, she was
Victoria
in love
Winters,
with
and I was like, "Fuck off, bitch."
him.
And
Yeah.
then I was like, "No, she's a really good actress. She does some really good roles. She's
Oh
really
yeah.
good." And
Yeah.
then I liked her. So, yeah, that's great. Well, now I'm gonna go watch Dark Shadows. Um, oh, my other favorite. I love those shows from the 70s, though. Late 60s and 70s,
Yeah.
all the
Yeah.
creepy shows. I love them. My other favorite is Night Gallery.
Oh, of course. And to me, the best episode of Night Gallery was the doll, the one that's the Algernon Blackwood story. But it's people get it mixed up with the Twilight Zone stuff. This is the one that
Hmm.
it's in the Victorian era, and
Oh
the
yeah.
colonel comes home from India, and somebody has given his granddaughter this creepy doll, and it's based on an Algernon Blackwood story, and that to me was my favorite Night Gallery episode.
I like the first one with Roddy McDowall in the graveyard and the painting, and I also like the one where he is this Nazi who's escaped to Argentina.
Yep.
It's a good one.
I
I won't tell people what happens, but he keeps going to this gallery to see this lovely painting because he wants to escape from everything, and it's not quite the ending that he would like.
Yep.
So interesting. All right, Walter. Well, I really do appreciate you coming on, and hopefully you'll come back. And
Sure.
I'm sure you have lots of other stuff. I mean, you've got a book out about your second book about the esoteric Napoleon, and so we'll have you back on again. Just so people know, where can they find you and buy your books, because they should buy the Napoleon stuff for sure.
Oh, absolutely. And now those are at walterbosley.com. That's the place.
All right. walterbosley.com. It's right there on his name, guys. All right, I'm going to pop you out, Walter, and tie up the show. You don't have to hang around, but thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me on, Melissa.
No problem. All right, guys, that was pretty cool. And you should check out Dark Shadows on, it's Tubi. I almost said Temu. God, what the hell? Temu? We don't need no Temu Dark Shadow. We need Tubi. All the episodes are on Tubi. That's where I watch it. You can't get the Night Gallery. I think you might be able to get Twilight Zone. I actually had to order the Night Gallery in on DVD. So, sorry. You probably have to find it that way. But, yeah. Vampires, blood drinking, blood suckers. It's all there. So tomorrow, we're going to have a show tomorrow. Usually I try to bring the guests on Thursday, but Jer, who's in the audience right now, and Nish are coming on tomorrow. We're probably going to talk about some esoterica politica. I think that we're going to talk about Ye and his video. I don't even know if I'll play the video because I don't want to get banned on YouTube again, but of course he's released a Hell Hitler video, his music video. Jared thinks it's silly. I think there's a whole bunch of levels to it, so we'll discuss that, other weird politics, things that are going on. I'm sure it will go everywhere, but that is going to start at 8 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. And then I'm probably not going to be, I'm going to be doing shows on Sundays for sure. I'll probably try to make them longer on Sundays because I'm starting other projects and getting things done. So it'll be today's show, tomorrow, then we'll do a Sunday show, and I'll see what we're doing in the future for different topics. So, of course, go to genxonx.com, and you will find all the information there for downloads, the streaming links to donate to the podcast, to look at the audio podcast. It's all there, genxonx.com. And I'm not going to keep you guys too much longer. I've been talking. My voice is going bye-bye. And I hope you guys have a wonderful evening. Happy Mother's Day once again, all you mothers out there. And I hope you enjoyed that show. And remember to check out walterbosley.com. Cheers.